Hello, everyone. How are you doing? So good morning for everyone in Japan. I was already chatting with some of you in the chat on YouTube. Let me just close this one. So for me, it's good night because I'm from Brazil, and here in Brazil is almost 11 p.m. But it's a pleasure for me to be speaking with all of you. It's my first time interacting with this part of the world, which is all the way down to Japan. So for me, it's a pleasure. I was chatting. I was seeing some beautiful cities from Japan: Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto. I can't wait to visit you in person. But today we are here to talk about PHP 8. PHP 8 is the new major version of PHP. Which I had the pleasure and the privilege of being involved with this language, and I'm gonna talk through everything that we have new and everything that we have changed. One thing before we started, organization. Thank you very much for the T-shirt. Really appreciate it. I have just received a gift saying that the PHP 8 version. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Cool. So PHP 8 is available. We released PHP 8 a couple of days ago, but PHP has a very busy release schedule. So all the way down to June, all the way up to June, we have started with the alphas, we have the feature freeze, we had the betas, and then we had the release candidates. We had 4 or 5, I don't remember. And then we had the general availability a couple of weeks ago. PHP 8.0.1 is coming on the first week of January, fixing some bugs that we have already found. But yeah, we are alive. We have PHP 8 available for everyone. One important thing that I want to talk with all of you. With PHP 8's release, there's a couple of changes in the versions that we support as PHP. So PHP 7.2 is not be supported anymore. PHP 7.3 is going to enter just security fixes. PHP 7.4 and PHP 8, they have active support. So if you are running on this some of these versions, please schedule with your team, with your company, or with your project to support PHP 8, because every single year we're skipping one version because maintaining a bunch of versions is difficult. So we prefer to support less, but we support better. And there we go. A quick introduction. So this is me wearing a mask in the airport here in Brazil. Last time that I visited Brazil, because now we all need to wear a mask. I'm from Brazil. I have lived in Brazil for my entire life, but I have moved to the Netherlands a couple of years ago, 1.5 years ago, to work for a company called SurveyMonkey, which, if you don't know SurveyMonkey, you're gonna have the chance to meet our product at the end of this talk, because I have prepared a form where you're gonna give me feedback about this talk, and I have built it using SurveyMonkeys too. And this is our major and most famous product. We give you the tools so you can build servers to collect feedback or to collect anything that you want from anyone. And in my spare time, I like to contribute to open source, especially PHP. And I think my biggest contributions was the PHP language itself. It was a pleasure, and I love it. We have a quick agenda. We're going to talk about performance improvements. We're going to talk about some of the new features, because we have tons of new features. We're going to talk about a couple of changes, especially the breaking changes, because those are the changes that matter to you to see how difficult it's going to be to upgrade to PHP. We're going to talk about the internal changes. It's not something that you're probably going to work with every single day, but there are some internal changes that are very important for the community. And also, we're going to talk about some behind the scenes of the PHP 8.0 development. One thing, I'm looking at the chat, so if you have questions during the talk, just let me know, because then if it's a quick question, I can just answer it, and then we don't accumulate everything to the end. So let's get started. Performance improvements. With every single new version of PHP major, we expect some huge performance improvements, and with PHP 8 is not different. We have DIT, which is a just-in-time compiler for PHP, but JIT by itself is huge. Is a whole topic. I could expend a whole day talking about this thing, but unfortunately, we don't have the time. So 2 things that I want to talk with you. First, JIT is focused on have processes. So if you are doing machine learning, if you're doing image processing, if you're doing blockchain, if you're doing, I don't know, spreadsheet manipulation, and then those spreadsheets are huge, those are the kind of applications that are going to be impacted by PHP's 8 JIT. But if you have, I don't know, you have fast APIs. Let's say that you have an API that is responding in 100 milliseconds. Those kinds of APIs, they're not going to be affected by JIT because, JIT is not focused on that, but probably you're going to see some performance improvements. And as I said, JIT by itself is huge. So there are a couple of talks that I have found from the community, and the one that I want to highlight is this last one that is in Russian. This guy, Dmitry, he was the one that implemented JIT in the source code of PHP. So this talk has a bunch of knowledge on how to implement JIT in a program language. What are the benefits? What are the malefits? What are the steps that you need to take? It was a very interesting talk. But then you also have a couple of talks in Portuguese, French, English, and I think I can find some in Japanese as well for you, and I update the slides later on. And another thing that I want to talk about performance improvements is about AWS. I don't know if you know this company, but it's called Amazon Web Services. In Europe and America, this company is huge in terms of servers. They're hosting, I think, a lot of the big applications that we have nowadays is hosted on AWS. And AWS is helping PHP to become faster. AWS is running some tests in some ARM64 machines, very specific machines, but they have found some performance improvements, and instead of just keeping for them, they have bring that back to PHP, which is amazing because we have these huge companies, for example, AWS, that are helping PHP, not with money, not with anything, but they have, I would think, I also thought that like AWS is huge, and they are helping PHP. So this is amazing. And they also have a blog post where they explain everything, how they found the performance improvements, how they benchmark, and how they propose that to PHP. And another thing that I forgot to mention, all the slides, they're already public, they are published. By the end of the talk, I'm going to have a link that I'm going to share with you. So don't freak out about panicking. Oh my God, I need to take a screenshot. Don't worry, I'm going to share everything with you. So, features. PHP 8 has a bunch of features. Here are some of them. And as you can see, we have a lot to talk. But unfortunately, we don't have the time. So I'm going to pick up 4 the biggest features of PHP 8. And let's get started. Union types. This is the second time that we try to implement unit types in the source code of PHP. Here, all the slides in terms of features or in terms of changes of PHP, we have. I have put a link to the official document that we have proposed. That the developers that propose the feature to PHP, this is where all the discussion happened, everything. So everything that I'm saying is public information. It's not something that I know or someone knows. This is public, so you can check it out later. But unit types. So unit types is something that you probably have already seen in your code base. Usually tells you that you have support of 2 or more types. So in this case, I have properties, I have arguments, I have return types, which are typed as union, but they're not typed. They're just documented that they are typed. And I can prove that to you that this thing is not working because I'm typing this thing as an integer and as a float. But as you can see, I can use a string here. I have no problems at all. Before PHP 8, you could do something like this. You could sanitize, you could validate your input saying, hey, if this thing is not an integer, if this thing is not a float, throw an exception, say you should have give me an integer or a float. But as you can see, is a lot of boilerplate code, a lot of overhead. So in PHP 8, we finally have unit types, properties, arguments, return types. You can type as many types as you want. You can use no types, you can use types. The same thing that PHP 7 types work, unit types, they work as well. And as you can see here, I have this code which is now being actually typed, and now is actually checking the input. So this argument is supposed to be an integer or float, and I'm giving a string, so this thing's gonna fail. So it's amazing because now natively by PHP we are checking union types, and it's a huge step to the language. I'm so happy that we could bring this on. As I said, you can use as many types as you want. Here I have all the types. I think I'm forgetting one or two, but here are all the types that you can specify. Of course, don't repeat. If you repeat one of the keywords, we are going to throw an error saying, hey, you have duplicated types. It's not necessary. But one thing that I want to talk about is that together with PHP 8, we have another new type called mixed. If you came from JavaScript or any other language that already have unit types, probably you know this. Probably already know this keyword as any, so any type. But in PHP, because of the community and the way that we have been working with PHP, we chose to go with mixed. So mixed is all the types. A lot of people don't like mixed, saying, hey, what is the difference between having a known type and a mixed type? And my goal for that is just use mixed, and then once you start to understand what kinds of values that you have in your code base, nail that down to maybe 4 or 5 or 3 types. So mixed is one step to a stricter code base, and is a new addition to PHP 8 that we also have. In terms of unit types is that. If you have any questions, just drop it out in the chat. I'm keeping all the types long. Yes, if you want to use all the types, you're going to have a huge line of types. Cool. The next feature that I want to talk about PHP 8 is something called match. But before we talk about match, I need to talk about switch. Switch is a very fundamental structure in PHP, but unfortunately we have some problems with switch, and I want to highlight some of them. In line 3, we have the value 2, and on line 12, I have one of the cases of switch being 2, but you can see that is a string and one is a number. But because of the way PHP works under the hood, switch use, let's say, the double equal. So you know the difference between 3 equals in PHP, which is strict, and then you have 2 equals in PHP, which is, they have similar values. This is what switch is doing under the hood in PHP. It's checking the types using double equal, which is, in some case, you might have some bugs. But this code works, no? But then you have another problem, which is on line 3, now we have another value, which is the number 3. And as you can see in this switch, we don't have a case for 3, not even the number. And then all the way on line 17, we have an error. But as you can see, this error is like it say that I don't have the variable. But if you take a look, you say this is not the problem. The problem is that I don't have a case inside of the switch, or I don't have a default, which is the case that you can fix on this thing. But what if the language could tell you like, hey, you're missing one of the cases? Or what if the language could check the values inside switch is strict? We discussed that, and we have come up with another solution, which is a new structure. We have this thing, I think, from other languages as well. PHP 8 brought a lot of things from other languages, and I think this is very important because we start to bring down some barriers that we have between languages. So let's say that a JavaScript developer wants to start coding with PHP, is way easier for them to start coding with PHP because now they have similar features in both languages. But never mind. Match. We have a new structure in PHP 8, which is very similar to switch, but we have some key difference. First one, the value now needs to match strictly. So the number 2 needs to have a case 2, not a string 2, a number 2. So this is very important. Second change, which is amazing, match can be used as an expression. So you don't need to do a switch, reserve a variable, and then echo that variable all the way to the down. You can echo out match straight away from the hood, which is going to save you some lines of code and is doing the same thing. And the most important one, in my opinion, and I'm going to explain why, PHP's match is now going to tell you if you don't have a case for that. And why this thing is important, because during development time, not production, not staging, or whatever kind of environment you use to verify that your code is working, or production code, during development time, you're going to see that you're missing one of the cases, which is amazing, because now you're going to reduce the amount of bugs that you have in production, because you're going to cut that in development time. And this is huge. This is amazing. This in terms of developer experience, this is huge. And I'm so happy that we have this thing now in PHP. Of course, we have the default, we have multiple cases, single cases. You can do a bunch of things inside a case the same way that we do with switch, but now we have a new structure called match. So we have all the bug fixes that we want with switch with a new structure. So we haven't touched switch in PHP 8. And two new features, two to go. Another one is called named arguments, and in my opinion, this is one of the biggest features of PHP 8. Why? Because it's going to make your code way easier for you to understand, and I'm going to give you an example so you can, let's see that we are thinking the same. I have a very simple code here. I have an array from lines 3 to 5, which I have 2 integers, and I have a string. On line 7, I want to filter that array using PHP 7.4 arrow functions, which I want to just filter the ones that are integers. And then on line 9, if I do a var dump on this integer, I have only 2 numbers, because the full was a string, so was ripped out. Easy code to understand, right? I hope you agree with me. But then we have a problem. We have this function that I am not familiar with in PHP, and then we have this thing. Array fill, 2, 3, and PHP. And then you're like, what the hell this thing it is? I have the same question. What the hell is the output of this thing? And then once you execute the code, you start to understand what those numbers are, what that string is. So you have 2, 3, 4. So you have an array of 3 items starting in the index 2, which all the values of that array is PHP. Okay, so now we understand what this function does. But what if we could see this function as like this? Array fill start key as 2, number of values in that array 3, and then all the values as PHP. It's way easier for you to understand this function. And this is what we have in PHP 8. We have something called named arguments, Python, Swift from Apple, Swift, sorry, the language from Apple. All those languages that already had named arguments for a while, and now on PHP 8, we're going to have this thing, which is a game change in terms of documentations and in terms of making your code easier to understand. And yeah, named arguments, I love this feature, and I'm going to give you some examples because this applies everywhere. So for example, I have a class called person, which I receive a name and an age. And as you can see on line 11 is way easier now for understand what person takes as arguments, because we have that documented. And yes, I'm young. I have only 23 years old. And here's my full name, Gabriel Caruso. So it's easier for us to understand. But PHP has some tricks, because PHP is not the perfect language of the world. There's one thing that I didn't know, but it's possible in PHP. Let's say that you have an interface, person with a method, and then you have an implementation of that interface called myPerson. Pay attention, we have renamed from name to full name. PHP allows you to do that. I didn't know that, but now we know. But then comes the question, in terms of named arguments, what do? Do you follow the renaming? Do you call the argument of the interface? We follow the rename. So for some reason, if you rename your interfaces implementations, follow the renaming. I suggest you not to rename stuff. Like if your interface has a name, follow that name. But if you're doing that, just a heads up that you're gonna need to follow the renamed one. Named arguments is something very, very important for what we call Boolean arguments, which is you have a bunch of Booleans, in your, take a look at line 14. We have an user which is true, false, and no. Jesus Christ, what the hell is happening here? Boom. With named arguments, this is way easier for you to understand. I have a user which is going to be an admin, which is not active, and there are no business rules attached to it. So it's, again, as I keep saying, it's easier for you to understand your code, it's easier for you to document your code, and it's just beautiful. It's just amazing. It's one of the best additions, and in my opinion, is the best addition of PHP 8. Quick. We have some caveats of this thing. Random orders, it's allowed. You can rename, you can randomize the arguments order. We allow that, no problems. If you have two or more optional arguments, you don't need any more to specify the first, the second, the third, and then if you want just to rename the fourth, you don't need now to specify everything. You just get the argument that you want to change the value, give that argument the number, and there you go. You have the thing. So it's amazing. It's going to clean a lot of code. Once again, about skipping one important thing. And pay attention. On line 13, we haven't started with named arguments. So we haven't named arguments. We don't have named arguments. But then the third argument is named. This is allowed because the skipping was made by the first two, but the last one has the argument. But if you do these kinds of things of skipping the first one, having the second as named arguments, and then the third one is not named, this is going to throw an error because PHP get lost in terms of what should I do with that. So we don't allow this, but we allow the line 13. Those are the kinds of permutations that we have with named arguments. But as I said, this is a great addition, and I can't wait to start using this thing because it's going to improve our code a lot. Last but not least, we're going to talk about attributes. If you have worked with Doctrine, if you have worked with Symfony, if you have worked with serialization, if you have worked with anything PHP that depends on attributes, and probably you know that thing as annotations, we didn't have native support for that in PHP. All the libraries, if they needed to do some handling of attributes, that thing needed to be done using, let's say, magic. We need to do some magic in order to parse this annotation to get the attributes of properties, classes, variables, or anything else. But there's a key difference. Annotations, they document your code. That's the only thing that annotations are for in PHP. Attributes is a kind of meta-programming where you change the behavior of your code using attributes. So let's say that you have a method in your router saying, hey, this method is mapped to that path, or you have an entity which is mapped to your database model, and then you have attributes. That's the kind of things that attributes are for. And finally, on PHP 8, we have attributes. This is a huge milestone for the language. This is very important. If you have worked with attributes, you know what I'm talking about. Lacking this thing, the language was huge, but now we have that thing, and it's a very nasty syntax, but it's very easy. Hashtag, and then you open curly braces, parentheses. I have forgotten the name in English, but you open the symbol, you close the symbol, and then you have it. An attribute. You can attribute classes, you can attribute properties, you can attribute variables, you can attribute everything. And why is important for us to have this thing in the language? A lot of people ask it, like, it is already working. Why do we need to bring this thing to the language? And I think the main takeaway is the first point. A lot of libraries, projects, and framework, they had their own implementation. So Doctrine had an implementation. Symfony had an implementation. Laravel, I think, has an implementation. GMS Serializer has another implementation. A bunch of implementations doing the same thing. But now with PHP 8, that thing is centralized in the language. And so everyone can benefit from caching, from optimizations, from speed, from source code, from everything. And annotations are going to be used just for documentation. one important thing, very, very important. PHP does not automatically convert your annotations with PHP 7 syntax to PHP 8. No, you need to implement, if it depends on attributes, you need to implement that in your code base. And then you're gonna tell your users of your library or your framework saying, hey, now we support PHP 8's attributes. There's a whole section in the RFC explaining how you implement that. Just if it depends on attributes, you probably already know reflection. I'm not gonna explain what reflection is, but if you have worked with attributes, probably know the concept of reflection. Attributes in PHP 8 are done by reflection. So we reflect something, you extract the information, and boom, there we go. Centralized, great. Yeah, this kinds of centralization is important because now everyone is gonna use the same mechanism, which if you have a bug, is one place to fix. If you have a performance improvement, is one place to code. So this is amazing. And those were the features. Those were not all the features, but those were some of the features. And I hope you are excited as I am. So a couple of changes of PHP 8. Those are not breaking changes. Those are just changes. In Symfony Word last week. Oh, okay. So thanks. So we have a Doctrine announced their support for attributes on Symfony Word last week. Huge, amazing. So yeah, Doctrine, for example, is already supporting PHP 8's attributes. Huge, amazing, mega. So moving on, in terms of changes, not breaking changes. Before PHP 8, you couldn't use throw, the keyword throw, as an expression. And what is this thing, expression? If you want to throw something on a callback, you couldn't. You need to do something else, maybe wrap it up that in a method and then call that method. And let's say that you have a nullable argument and then you want to throw if that thing was not nullable. You need to do an if is not no, and then you throw an exception. But now on PHP 8, we have bring something from JavaScript, which is throw is an expression. You can inline that in every single piece of code that you have. Null coalesce, arrow functions, body functions, everything that you want to do with expressions, you can now do with throw, which is probably going to clean up a lot of code doing the same thing. Another small change. If for some reason you don't use the exception that was catch with a try catch structure, remember that you need to specify, like, I have a variable here, but I'm not gonna use it, but I need to specify. In PHP 8, you don't need to specify anymore. It's a very small change, but if you don't use it, there you go. Just clean it up, one less variable. One important change that we made, and this is very important if you work with databases. Before PHP 8, the PDO, the PHP Data Object API and extension, which is the extension that makes the bridge between a database and PHP. If anything happens with your database, PHP wouldn't let you know because the default error mode for PDO was silence. So let's say that your table was locked, or let's say that your database was down, or let's say that you couldn't write to the table because of permissions. You wouldn't receive an error. You would only receive something like, yeah, I tried to do that, I couldn't, I failed. But now with PHP 8, if you try to do something with PDO and then you have an exception in your database, that thing is gonna be brought back by PHP as an exception. So instead of seeing some nonsense errors, you're gonna see something like, hey, I tried to write to this table, but that table was locked, or I have tried to reach the database, but the database is down. So this is huge. This is very important. This was a small change, but it is a huge change in terms of how you deal with PDO. But if you use Doctrine, if you use Eloquent, or if you use any other framework to manipulate databases, this thing was already set it up. But if you have raw PDO implementations, pay attention because this thing is going to change. Backwards incompatibility changes. This is where you should pay attention because this is what is going to tell you how difficult or how easy it's going to be for you to migrate from PHP 7 to PHP 8. First, everything that was deprecated on PHP 7 now is removed on PHP 8. So everything that is deprecated from PHP 7.0, 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, and 7.4 is removed on PHP 8. So if you were relying on deprecated functions, I'm sorry, but they are gone. There's a whole list in this pull request, but one example, if you had the PHP 4 constructors, which the name of the method is the same name of the class, that thing was deprecated, I think, in PHP 5 or PHP 7.0. Now is removed on PHP 8, so that's not gonna work anymore in your code. Cool. This thing, not only I am a release manager of PHP 8, but I also made some changes of PHP 8, and I'm sorry, and I introduced a breaking change, but I'm gonna explain why we did it. Before PHP 8, you could have a magic method. So by the way, magic methods in PHP, if you're not familiar, I recommend you to check it out because it's a very powerful mechanism. But imagine that you have a class, and if something happened with that class, a magic method is called. So for example, if you try to cast full to a string, you have the toString magic method. Before PHP 8, you could do something like this. You could return a Boolean, which doesn't make any sense because you need to return a string. Why are you returning Boolean? So on PHP 8, not only the toString, but all the magic methods, we are checking we are checking the signature of those methods. So for example, the ESET magic method was supposed to return a Boolean. So if you're not returning a Boolean, you're gonna need to fix that signature. It's not mandatory for you to put the type, but if you're using type and you're using wrong, there you go. You're gonna have to change it. And I'm sorry, it was a breaking change, but I hope you can understand why we did it. Another breaking change, which for me, it's fun that PHP allowed you to do that, but let's check it out. Before PHP 8.0, you could divide an empty array with a for each array and you receive 1 or 0, which makes no sense. Before PHP 8, you could have an array and you could increment that array, which also makes no sense. And also you could increment classes, which again makes zero sense. You can't increment classes, you can't increment arrays, you can't divide an array with another array. So those kinds of arithmetic operations, they are now gone. You're not allowed to do that in PHP anymore. I hope you weren't doing that, but if you were, I'm sorry, you're gonna need to change for some reason. I don't know how you end up with that logic, but if you were doing that, please fix it. This is why you're gonna see these kinds of errors, because of this specific change. There are a whole list with all the operators that we have changed. But if you're doing crazy things with PHP, don't do crazy things with PHP. We allowed, but don't do it. And now the biggest breaking change of PHP 8, but once again, I hope you understand why we did it, which is, before PHP 8, there were some comparisons that didn't make any sense at all. Maybe I never did this. Okay, thank you. You're a good developer. Don't do crazy things with PHP. Sometimes do it, but don't do in production. But talking about string and number comparisons. 0 is equal, not identical. 0 is equal to string 0. Yes, we haven't changed it. 0 is equal to the float 0. Yes, we have changed it. But this thing, before PHP 8, PHP considered a string and 0 as equal, which is not true. So we have changed that in PHP 8. So every single string now compared to a 0, compare using the double equal sign, not the triple equal sign, is now false. And I hope you agree with us that a string and 0, they're not equal, they're different. 0 and an empty string was considered true, but now is considered false for the same reason. Empty string and 0, empty values and zeros, they are different. Nullable bytes and nullable strings, they have their similarities, but 0 and empty string they have nothing in common. So these things change. A number following by a string which has a lot of white spaces, we haven't changed that, continues to be true. But if you, before PHP 8, if you have something like 42, which is equal to 42 full, that thing was true. And the reason because we internally in PHP, we manipulate this string and we remove the string, we let the number, and then 42 is equal to 42, yes, return true. But now what we're doing is we're not manipulating this string any longer. So 42 full is not equal to 42. Cool. I think I have all the cases covered here, but once again, once you download the slides, go check it out. What has changed. But my takeaway is don't use this symbol. Don't use equal, because equal in JavaScript, PHP, and all the C-like language, they have some crazy stuff happening under the hood, which might lead you to bugs. So use the triple equal sign, which is identical. So identical to this, identical to that, and there you go. Cool. So far so good. Everyone awake? Oh, you just started your day. I'm the one that is gonna sleep in a couple of hours. But so far so good. I hope you're enjoying the talk. Questions? I can't see any new. PHP 4 constructors bad. Old memories gone. Cool. Yeah. I never, as I said, I'm 23 years old and I have started to work with PHP 7, if I'm not wrong. So I never ever touched a PHP 5 code base. So I'm thankful that those things are gone, but I have never worked with it. So internal changes, those are important. Probably you're not going to use it, but it's going to affect your code. First one, reflection API. So remember when I said about reflection API? Reflection API is a very powerful API of PHP, which allows you to reflect something. Classes, methods, functions, constants, anything. See it as a meta-programming. So let's say that you need to have an information of the array filter function, which for every single parameter of the array filter, you want to know the type, you want to know the name, and then you want to know also the return type of that function. Before PHP 8, we didn't specify those informations internally. No, 0, PHP 7 brought the types, but we haven't added. But on PHP 8, we now have it. So if you do rely on the reflection API, and if you do rely, you know what I'm talking about. This thing was a pain in the ass to get it sorted out. But there you go. Now we have it, all the types informations for every single internal function of PHP. We are talking about 3,000 plus functions that now have their type information, and we are going to talk about the people that were responsible for these changes. But there we go. On PHP 8, we have it. If you work with one of these projects, you know how important the reflection API it is for them. But for example, JetBrains, which is the company that created PHP Storm, which is one of the IDEs to work with PHP, they had a project just to map those kinds of type information. But with PHP 8, probably they don't need it anymore. So probably you're going to see some of these projects gone. But also we're going to see some projects that had they had their own list now wrap it out because PHP 8 have that information, which is cool. And the other internal changes that I want to talk with you are some PHP INI changes. I think the most important one is the first one. Before PHP 8, everything that was a notice and was a deprecation warning, those weren't included in the error reporting default value. What does that mean? If you have a fresh PHP installation and application and you have a notice and you have a deprecation warning, you wouldn't see that in your CLI or in your browser because PHP didn't tell you that. Because the EALL, which stands for warning, notices, errors, deprecations, exceptions, and a bunch of other things, if I'm not wrong, they didn't include those two values, but now on PHP 8 they are included. So if you have anything that was a silent warning on PHP 7.4 and below, probably you're gonna see that on the PHP 8 fresh installation. And the other PHP 9 changes that I want to talk about. If you do use assert, which is one of the functions of PHP, to just verify that what you're doing with code is right, before PHP 8 was just a warning saying, hey, you're asserting that full is equal to true. But now we are throwing an exception, which if you understand a little bit about assertions, you know that assertions are supposed to help you during development time to improve your code. So an exception is gonna give you more headaches to fix that instead of a warning, because a warning you can just skip the warning and keep going, but exceptions you need to treat, and you need to fix that exception if you want to move on. So those are another changes that we did to PHP 8's PHP 9. Almost there, almost finishing. Behind the scenes of PHP 8.0 development, which as I said, was a pleasure for me to work with PHP 8, but I'm not the only one. We have a huge team that is working with PHP 8, and I want to highlight some of them. So as I said, I'm one of the release managers, but I'm not alone, and I couldn't do this without Sarah. So Sarah, she has been working with PHP forever. She is a dinosaur, and she knows a lot. That woman she has some knowledge that I can't even describe. She was the PHP 7.2 release manager, but now as PHP 7.2 is gone, she has moved to PHP 8 release management, and she's helping me. And what do? We check it out. We get all the functions that were coded with the PHP 8 source code team. We wrap it out, and then we put it available to everyone. So this is our main function. Of course, we needed to coordinate the release calendar that I showed in the beginning, but our main job is to just every single 4 weeks we have a new patch version release of PHP 8. And in that patch, Sarah and I are going to be the one in a ping pong schedule. We're going to get those changes, wrap it out, publish the tarballs, publish the things. And then if you use Docker is going to automatically get those new versions and bring it up to you. So those are our main functions among something else. But we are not alone. As I said, we are just the release managers, because now we're going to have a list of some of the developers that help PHP to exist. So the first one is Dimitri. He was responsible for JIT. And JIT is important, and it was huge, and he has some knowledge, again, that I can't describe. He was the one responsible for that. Nikita, he was hired by JetBrains a couple of years ago, and was one of the best things for the PHP ecosystem, because this guy, I think, was more than 10 features of PHP was made by him. So he knows a lot about the PHP internals code, and he's doing a lot to make PHP a better language. But we also had another folks that helped us to make PHP 8 available and possible, which was Christoph, which is responsible mainly for the Microsoft Windows compatibility. So PHP also works with Windows, and Christopher is the ones responsible for that. But Christoph is also doing an amazing job with documentation after the release of PHP 8. So kudos for him for doing that. We also have Jacob, which maintains the FPM SAP. So PHP has a couple of SAPs, which are the interfaces of PHP. So CLI, FPM, PHP DBC. There's a bunch of SAPs, but FPM is one of the ones that we use in our company, and Jacob is the one maintaining that. So kudos to him and thank you. Matteo Beccati, he's Italian. He's one of the organizers of the PHP Day in Italy. He was responsible for a lot of changes with the PDO extension, but more focused on the Postgres side, which again, I thank him because we use that in our company. Fan, which is a stat analyzer tool, which is an alternative for Psalm and also for PHP Stan. all the knowledge that they're getting in Fun, they are bringing it to PHP to make PHP a better language. So Tyson, which is one of the maintainers of Fun, he has worked with us and help us. Those two gentlemen, they were the reason that we had that reflection improvement. Remember when I said about 3,000 plus people, 3,000 plus functions that now have the argument information, the type information? He, of course, was a huge task for us, but those were the two main responsible for that to happen. One thing that I'm gonna highlight, all the names link to their GitHubs, and with GitHub sponsors, you can sponsor their work. So if you want to give money to PHP because you work with PHP for free, those are the ones that you can give the money and say, hey, I thank you for doing PHP a better language, and there you go, you can help them. Alex, as far as I know, he was the first contributor from Africa. So PHP, we have people from Japan, we have people from Brazil, we have people from Europe, we have people from Africa, we have people from all over the world making PHP possible because PHP is open source, and this is amazing. I love it. I love this part of the talk. And also Iliha is one of the was or is one of the maintainers of PHP Stem. So he was also responsible for 3 or 4 RFCs in PHP 8. And spoiler, Iliha is also working in enums for PHP 8.1 or PHP 8.2. So stay tuned because this guy still has some fire. He has some stuff for us. And also want to highlight that it's not only about the internal community, but also the external or the userland community. We had people from very huge frameworks and libraries helping PHP to be what it is. So Benjamin, which is one of the core members of Doctrine, he was responsible for the attributes RFC. And there you go. He works in Doctrine, but he has helped PHP to become a better language. Nicholas, which is one of the core members of Symfony, has also helped PHP 8 to become a better language. I think Nicholas' RFC was a serializable, was a stringable interface. I haven't talked about that, but there's a new interface in PHP called stringable, and Nicholas was responsible for that. And as you can see, anyone and everyone can contribute to PHP. So this is amazing. And yeah, that's not all. I have talked a lot. I have talked for almost an hour, but that's not all. I have published a document which has every single official and not official information about PHP 8, and as you can see, there's a whole list of changes that you can go, you can understand, you can see what is going to impact you, what's not going to impact you. And yeah, that's it. PHP 8 is out, is released. I'm so glad that we made it out. And yeah, that was my presentation. One thing that I want to talk about, the slides are public, slides.com/Caruso Gabriel. Then you have the Portuguese and the English version, so you can download the slides and check it out. One thing I want to ask you to give me feedback. So as I said, remember when I said about SurveyMonkey? So you can scan this QR code, or you can access this link, and you can be you're going to be redirected to a survey form, which is you can give me some tips of what I did very good or what I should improve, because I'm not done. I still have a couple of talks to do this year, so when I'm give as much content as I want. And that's it. If you have questions, toss it out in the chat. Also, the organization is going to help me with the Discord if we have anything on Discord. But apart from that, thank you. It was a pleasure to talk with the Japanese community. And as I said in the chat, I can't wait to visit you once Corona is over, because I never ever been in this part of the planet, and there's so much that I need to learn from your culture. So yeah, that's it. Obrigado. Yeah, so thank you in Portuguese. What is thank you in Japanese? Arigato, if I'm not wrong. But yeah, thank you.